our intuitive response is to assume that these biblical characters are always doing what they're supposed to do, which is, as it turns out, not always the case, and it's not only Jonah. Um, but Jonah, people might wonder a little bit why he doesn't follow the Lord's call. He runs in the other direction, but maybe we assume that the rest of the book, he's kind of like his prayer in chapter 2, for
Hmm.
example, sounds really good. Echoes the Psalms and things like that. So we might be inclined to think that apart from going the wrong direction initially, that he repents, let's say after the prayer in chapter 2 and goes to Nineveh was well intended, but the book only lets us get so far with that misconception, which is to say it challenges us to, as the Bible itself challenges us to say, look, in this case, this prophet is not doing what he's supposed to do. He's not believing what he's supposed to believe, and the Lord sits him down, as it were, for a talk. And the book leaves that conversation open-ended in terms of what Jonah learned or didn't learn. So that would be one, I think, pretty common misconception. That doesn't mean, as this whole conversation presumes, that the book can't teach us anything. It's just that in some respects, Jonah is kind of a negative example of what not to do or how not to what not to believe, things like that. I would say that some people are a little skeptical in terms of the historical value of the book.
Mm.
My take on it is a bit more positive. Um, there are such things as parables in both testaments. They're
Hmm.
not typically this long. They're not presented as freestanding narratives.
Hmm.
Jonah we recognize from the Book of Kings, so I don't think there's a strong reason to doubt, for example, in terms of its literary genre, that it's there to recount history. Um, some this would be outside of the evangelical circles. I think some people would be skeptical of the reliability of the story since there are miraculous events happening. But if that's your your angle, it's going to be problematic to read much of the Bible, as a matter of fact, and
Yeah.
to allow for God to do things in history. And there are odd things. There are some exceptional situations, kind of like part of Jonah's ministry, that some Assyrian sources record for us. So something that seems to portend a divine judgment, a famine, or
Mm.
an eclipse. And there are some records in which Assyrians react in similar ways, call for fasts, call for repentance, renewed fidelity to their gods. So the general scheme of the story, the events which it includes, which are unusual and
Hmm.
sometimes quite so, nonetheless do fit in a worldview that's the ancient Near East in terms of fasts and expecting divine judgments, and in terms of the biblical context in the canon, stories in which supernatural things happen. You can't get very far in the canon without
Yeah.
stumbling across those.
Yeah. I always, when people talk to me about the historicity, especially of Jonah, really with a lot of things in the Old Testament, there seems to be, though obviously within scholarship, there's an increasing number of questions about the historicity of things in the New Testament. But it seems to me that most of the big questions come with the Old Testament text. It always surprises me, if you start from a confessional position, that you have a commitment to the Christian faith. Your belief, the core belief that you really can't negotiate around, is that Jesus rose from the dead. And so I always say, right there, if that's the core belief around which I build my faith, then the idea that someone could be swallowed by a fish and survive that, I'm like, that in and of itself does not indicate to me that it's not history. Like, that can't be a disqualifying factor. But then you have to wrestle with all these other questions that are difficult questions to wrestle with the Book of Jonah. But one of the things that I've been most interesting in, and the way you sort of laid it out, is the way that we have to approach questions of history in the Bible is very often not one of provability in like a scientific sense, but more a question of plausibility. Can we imagine a context or a situation in which, the worldview, as you mentioned, or the things that story could plausibly be situated within? I think of that within a lot of the patriarchs in the Old Testament, where the historical record is just not going to give us, very often, except for in really remarkable cases, specific evidence that can, beyond a shadow of a doubt, prove that someone existed. But you can create, and reconstruct plausible scenarios. And so I appreciate that you brought that out, because I think some people, whether you go a more parable approach to Jonah or say it's more historical, I think one of the easy things that more conservative Christians will tend to do is sort of chastise people who call into question, acting as if the only reason to question that is a non-belief in miracles. And I just want to be like, "Well, no, there you can believe that it's possible and still have questions and still, really grapple with this.
Yeah.
But it's an important process to work through. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Did you have another misconception or something to add?
No, but just to add to what you just said, or actually just rephrase the last bit. I agree that some people describe the difference. This is proven Long and Longman in their book. It's a difference between a standard of verification,
Hmm.
where unless something backs up of that an event, I can't believe that it happened, versus something falsification. Do I have any reason to doubt it?
Hmm.
Other than my own worldview differs from that of the text, for example. But there are different ways to accept historical reports as plausible